Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today. And thanks so much for being here with us for the 16th edition of the Trinidad and Tobago Film Festival, which this year is happening completely online. And I'm just thinking that it's so exciting that you can go to ttfilmfestival.com, watch movies, watch industry events, rate movies, vote for People's Choice. It's just really fantastic. So my name is Marielle Brown. I'm the Interim Executive Director of FilmCo, and FilmCo manages the Trinidad and Tobago Film Festival now. Today, I'd like to welcome you to the Misogyny and the Male Gaze panel. Our panels this year are brought to you with the support of Shell Trinidad. Actually, this is a good time to have a discussion like this. We're in the midst of the MeToo movement, and as Caribbean filmmakers, we really need to be part of that worldwide industry dialogue about the depiction of women and representation of women in film. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to our moderator, BC Pires, who's also in Tobago in 1984 and enrolled as a solicitor at the Supreme Court of England and Wales in 1989. But since January 1988, he's done nothing but write for a living. His satirical column, Thank God It's Friday, published every Friday of the last 33 years, wow, began at The Express, appeared in The Guardian and the journalist-owned Independent before moving to the Newsday in 2017. Welcome, BC.
Good. Thank you, Marielle. I think you can hear me now.
Yes, we can hear you now.
And thank you for that, that gracious introduction. And since I have you here, I will say that I would not have been in writing the papers but for your dad, Wayne Brown, who is the father of the literary newspaper column and was writing 5 columns a week when I began my one. So it's much easier to keep one going for 30 years than 5.
Yeah, I think he found that in the end too, but thank you so much, BC. I think the 5 columns a week didn't, I mean, it lasted a few years, but I think he saw the error of his ways at some point. Anyway, thank you, BC.
Good. So do I take it away now?
Absolutely, yes. Please do.
So your panelists, you will know the names of your panelists from having looked at the program. I will introduce them one at a time as they come on to make statements, individual statements, before we begin the wider discussion. I echo what Marielle was saying about the concern of the violence. There's a lot of violence in film nowadays, that's a given. But more and more, we're seeing it directed by Caribbean filmmakers towards Caribbean women. It would be a worry if it were Italian or anybody involved. And of course, we are Caribbean people. And it's really concerning when we see our own men, our own male filmmakers, making these images that are sometimes very, very difficult to look at. Which is not to say that this is new. This has been going on for a long time. In fact, since 1933, almost 100 years ago, in the original King Kong, the image of Fay Ray in the fist of King Kong is still emblematic of women in movies today. And indeed, in the Caribbean, it's even worse, because for a lot of aspiring actors, actresses, the way that you develop your reel is as a dancer or a backup singer or in music videos. And as was pointed out by Justine Hensel in yesterday's panel, The Caribbean Gaze, women are the most throwaway of props in Caribbean videos, which is the predominant form of Caribbean film. I would hazard a guess. Today, there are more music videos being made than any other kind of film, short film, I'm suggesting. And And again, even though it has a particular sharp and painful focus for us, it's not limited to us. In the world capital of filmmaking, which I think even the most ardent of nationalists would grudgingly admit is Hollywood, women have only just begun to come out from under extremely exploitative relationships with men. Of course, one would never say that they've only just begun to come out from under Harvey Weinstein. Now, the MeToo movement has been critical in bringing about a change in consciousness, just like Black Lives Matter came at the right time. MeToo came at the right time. Amongst other things, our panelists will consider how effective that movement has been in redressing the imbalance, making the perhaps erroneous and dangerous assumption that the imbalance can be redressed at all. I've asked the panelists in making and framing their remarks to bear in mind not just the titular misogyny in the male gaze, but to frame those remarks while remembering how few films, even today, can pass the Bechdel test. Now, everybody knows, I'm pretty sure that almost everyone listening knows the Alison Bechdel test. She is a creative person, wrote a very funny and very provocative comic in which the test was first put forward, where she said she only goes to see movies that, one, have two women in it, two, include a scene where the two women talk to one another, and three, what they talk about has nothing to do with a man. The strip concludes with her saying the last film she was able to watch was Aliens. And in that film, the women were talking about the alien who stood in place of the male. So it's a steep uphill climb. I'm suggesting we'll see what people say, and we'll have a bit of a chat, or maybe a bit of a quarrel about it. I've also asked them to bear in mind, if possible, at all points of the narrower discussions and the perhaps even narrower statements, that there's a fundamental freedom that we restrict at our own peril, which of course is the freedom of expression. Every filmmaker has the right to make the film she or he wants to make. Whether that film is Thelma and Louise or Saw. As Salman Rushdie famously pointed out when he was under fatwa for the crime of writing a book that the people who sentenced him to death had never read, without the freedom to offend, freedom of speech is meaningless. So in everything we say here today, I would like us to remember that we threaten freedom of expression at our own peril as artists, as filmmakers, as creative people, as writers. From the time you start limiting anyone's parameters, you start limiting creation itself. And then finally, I've asked the panelists to consider that after the very strong winds of fascism blowing across the world with hurricane force nowadays, the greatest threat to freedom of speech is probably what is called cancel culture, and the notion that people's feelings have to be respected, even in deliberately provocative works of art. I don't think I have to say where I would prefer to be, which I would prefer to defend. Okay, so I'm going to ask now the first one of our three panelists. I'll tell you the three panelists, Nicola Cross, Ann Barratt, and Ryan Lee. We have a Ann and a Ryan, but we only have one Cross, which is Nicola. That sounds bad, Nix, but it's actually meant well. Ryan is going to, Ryan is going to speak first, and depending on whether you take a male gaze, that could be regarded as chivalrous, or if you take a female gaze, that might be regarded as yet another example of the patriarchy asserting itself. I'm teasing. Ryan is a filmmaker. He won the 14th Trinidad and Tobago Film Festival People's Choice Award for his narrative short, Flying the Coop. He's educated in audio technology, which he himself describes as another name for audio engineering. He graduated from the University of the West Indies with a BA in film production and a special in film studies. He's worked on productions locally and internationally, including Green Days by the River, Immune, Moving Parts, and Icarus and Lavway, both of which are in this year's edition of the film festival. It's important to Ryan that you know that he visited the set of Concussion, starring Will Smith. So I want to see how he works that into the Me Too movement. Seriously, I'm going to ask Ryan to start now. Remember, he is, like a lot of us, aspiring to develop a voice for local and Caribbean film that can be heard worldwide. Thank you, Ryan. Please.
All right. Thanks for that introduction there, BC. I have a film mini festival this year as well. It's just a little wine. It's also, check it out. So it's same day as Lavway, so Friday, tomorrow actually, on the 24th. Anyways, so to jump in on this, I think it's important to understand what they mean by what is the male gaze, right? So Laura Mulvey actually was the person who coined the term, and she was saying that the gender power asymmetry is a controlling force in cinema and constructed for the pleasure of the male viewer, which is deeply rooted in the patriarchal ideologies and discourses. So I think it's important that we analyze this and understand this, but to fully understand the male gaze, I think we must first understand the roots of the problem. And to do that, we need to look at our history and analyze where everything what is the root of the male gaze throughout history, right? So Dr. Gerda Lerny has a book called The Creation of Patriarchy, which was, I think, published in 1986. And in there, she attributes the foundation of this to many factors. So one of which, if you look back back in times where in society where it was hunter-gatherer, and even at the advent of agriculture, where we would settle and farm, the advent of that, so infant mortality the rate was much higher. Life expectancy was much shorter as well. So what would happen is that males would go out, do the gathering, the hunting, see about the food and bring in food home. And then the woman would more likely be home nursing the children, because that's important to the tribe. So the sustainability of the tribe, because you need somebody to make sure the children are okay, because with a high infant mortality rate, it's very important that you survive, right? So with that, also you have warrior tribes. So after conquest and spoils of war, they would take the women and children and most likely kill the men, right? So, and even intertribal exchanges and deals for women, they would trade women, and this was a part of their role. The women were, I can't tell you if they were okay or not, but it was seen as the norm, So you could kind of see where women became commodities and the men had more power over them, you could say, and that they could trade them. Right? You need to go here, we need this, we need that, right? And we're going to capture these women, XYZ, right? So you get to kind of see the roots. And And then later on in history, you could see the development, obviously, with STEM, and patriarchal society would also grow, and men were in charge. But they had like a view of women then, and non-conforming women would always be villainized, you could say. So, for example, you could look at Queen Elizabeth. She was obviously the Queen of England, like one of the most powerful people in the world at the time, but she chose not to get married. And for that, like they have numerous rumors about the Queen, like she was gay, she was doing this, she's sleeping with this one, like a bunch of things, just because she was a powerful woman and non-conforming to the patriarchal construct. So Joan of Arc as well, a younger lady, did amazing things for her country, but then also villainized, burning at the stake. Right. So all of these things, you could see where the role of women would be pigeonholed. So they could only do certain jobs, right? You take care of the home as your job. You could, maybe be a secretary, but don't try to be anything in power, because women had to be protected. They were fragile. These are the things we need to, protect. So they have stuff like the Hays Code, where you couldn't see nudity, like you couldn't see shoulders on screen. They had Hays Code is a filmmaking. They had a law in America where you couldn't show certain stuff on screen to make like a clean society, kind of. Anyways, so even in more recent times, like you could see this gender bias where men would have more rights than women. So even up till 1993, in some states it took up to until 1993 for marital rape to be recognized as a crime in all these states in America. 1993, right? Into the 70s, women couldn't own businesses. They couldn't hold a credit card in their own name. You could be struck from a jury just because you're female, or you could be fired because you're pregnant. And even if you went to like a Ivy League school, you couldn't even get a appointment for an interview in a law firm. An Ivy League school. This is the kind of prejudices and pigeonholes that they would have against women in society. But with the advent of women liberation, though, you start to see women coming out. So with more freedom, they could get better jobs, and they could wear what they want. And society, obviously, is still taking its time, but they could form their own image into what they think they should look like, act like. But it's also a double-edged sword. So now, to me, personally, this is my opinion, right? So in my opinion, I think it's a double-edged sword, because now men, who are the people in charge of the stories, because, from generations before, stories, literature, movies, they could now tell themselves, well, we don't have to defend them as much, and we could show them in this clothes because that's the freedom that they want. That is what is sexy, and they should not be afraid to wear this. But this is what they want to see as well. This is what the men want to see as well. So to me, it's a kind of double-edged sword. Yes, you have your freedom, but now men could take advantage of that. So women were beginning to be objectified, sexualized in stories. I mean, it was happening before, but now they could flaunt it and market it and and sell it. So you have films, books. Wonder Woman is a case you could watch, where the creator of Wonder Woman actually says he's a feminist, and he's actually modeled her off of a feminist role model of his. But then when you watch her design and you see like these tight clothes, the short skirt, the original design was a skirt, and the bracelet she would have, the bracelet she have on is kind of symbolizing of handcuffs and bondage and S&M. Her weapon is a rope, and in all the panels they would have every story she would be bound, gagged, tied up, handcuffed, chained to something. It's always that kind of element to it. But he said he's a feminist, and this is the version of what he wants in society, where women could take charge of their life and power and lead with love. But then he also fell in love with a student and told his wife the student has to live with them or he's gonna leave the wife. So you could look at him as a special character. All right. So when you see these things in media, the problem is that also shapes. It's a reflection of society, and it also shapes what the viewer would come to believe. So boys growing up and girls would go to movies or read books and say, all right, well, that is what I should look like, and that is how I should behave, and that is how women should dress. And to be pretty, I have to look like this, and I have to do this. And as a man, I need to sleep with as many women as possible. Like you watch all those action movies, 007, every movie is some other lady, in scantily clad clothes. All right. So and then when women see this is what I should wear to be attractive to men, they also keep the ball rolling on the stereotypes. Right. So in film, we could see the signs of the male gaze in certain ways. So we could watch at the wardrobe. Says super sexualized, tight, short. Sometimes it doesn't even make sense. Like you watch a movie with women fighting in medieval times or whatever, and the armor is obviously not battle armor. It's like you could see cleavage. You could see it's just no reason, but it's there. Makeup as well. Everybody's well done. Women don't look ugly. Their hair is never all over the place. People have bad hair days in real life. Some people losing hair. It's a thing. So women don't always have to look a certain way, but that's what you see in movies. Shot composition as well is another example of what you could see. So they always tend to highlight the female form and figure, but it's always the perfect form, right? So, for example, I'm not sure if anyone saw Queen's Gambit on Netflix. There's a shot where she has like a big drug binge, alcohol binge, and the camera is above doing a spiral above and pushing in, but the center frame is on the way. Like she's there as well, but center frame of the underwear and pushing in, right? Also Transformers. If you look at Megan Fox in the first Transformers, she opens the car to fix Bumblebee, but then the shots are literally like her waist, her belly is out, short top, short skirt, sweaty, and like they would push her around, like move around her body to see. It was not really about her; it's about her body. She's just there because we need to see the body. So body shape is like a big deal as well. So what is a perfect shape? And it's even like one of the culprits you could say is also Disney. If you watch old Disney character movies, Snow White, all of these, they are perfect shape. Nobody had too much bread, Everybody is a perfect shape. And you could watch Ariel, Little Mermaid. You could watch Jasmine. All their midsections out. They all look amazing, right? And little girls would grow up thinking, well, I need to look like this. And little boys would be like, my princess needs to look like this. And everything else is not good enough. And also the stories themselves. So these girls and ladies and women in the movies, their dream is to meet their Prince Charming. And that's it. To live happily ever after in life, your goal should be to fall in love and be swept off your feet. And so you are subject to the man. Like you can't be happy without him, without a heterosexual male, and there are many movies that you could see stuff like this. You could see in the Tomb Raider franchise, obviously Angelina Jolie is in some ridiculous outfits, hypersexualized. But the newer Tomb Raider movies, you could tell they are trying to fix that. Transformers, as I said before, Underworld series is full latex. Aeon Flux, Barbarella is an example of an older show. Charlie's Angels, etc. And these movies also has an impact on unknowingly on some people, I would say. So if you even watch the new Wonder Woman, both movies that Patty Jenkins did in 2017 and last year, I believe, was the other one. Or was it this year? Anyways, female director, very good director. And And Wonder Woman is like this big symbol for woman power and liberty and freedom and independence. But when you watch I mean, I'm not saying she did this on purpose or even knowingly. But my big critique about the movie was that the male was still the person making the big decisions and choices in that movie. So in the first movie, he took his own life. He risked his own life. He said, "All right, I'll go and fly this thing and crash it to make sure everybody in Europe is safe." But she's invincible. Why didn't she do that? You know, she's Wonder Woman. She could do everything. So why did he have to sacrifice his life and make that choice, that personal choice? Why is he the one in power and in charge? And the second movie is the same thing. He was the one to make the personal sacrifice, where she was just like, "Nah, I can't do that." And he had to do it. And that's from a female director. And the movie was all about female power. Anyways, so having said all of that, I think with the MeToo movements and society is, I think, hopefully getting better. Because now we see more female-led stories. We see more female directors. So even if you watch Kate on Netflix, just came out recently, action movie, but it's not hypersexualized like movies of the past, you know? So she's like bloody all the time, hair all over the place, like cuts, bruises, throwing up everywhere, but she's still getting the job done, right? She's still doing her thing. So I think it's important to see stuff like that, you know? So women could have other role models. I don't have to look 100%. From the minute I wake up, I have to look 100%. For who? Who cares, right? But even Disney characters are changing. So if you watch movies like Moana, one of my favorites, Moana is one of the greats of all time. There's no love interest. There's no, you know, I have to have a big romance kind of thing. She was the one, like, her dad was telling her no, and she's like, "Nah, man, I do my own thing. You know, I want to live my life. I want to like follow my dreams, and this is what I believe, and this is what I want to do." And the grandmother was the mentor, not even the dad. You know, she was living her own dream, and she was the one saving the world. You know, so I think we have a future and hope, and I really hope this continues. So that's my piece on the whole thing.
Thank you very much, Ryan. And that was a really useful, for me, a really useful framing of the male gaze. I think there's just one thing I was worried about when you were talking. You talked about people having a bad hair day, and I was wondering if that was directed to me personally. But then I noticed you have the same hairstyle, so I realized that's just a bit of my my paranoia. But seriously, that was a very, very useful description of the male gaze, and it makes me think. I'm going to ask Nicola, as a feminist filmmaker, to speak next. But I was thinking as you were talking there, Ryan, that male gaze is not just a male gaze, but it is a Hollywood gaze, which is a white male American gaze. And it has persisted because we've never even thought of challenging it. We have actually adopted this stance until very, very recently. And I'll just throw in one more thing before asking you to start, Vix, which is as part of a introduction to politics course, which I did when I went to UE, I researched the attitude of the Guardian newspaper to the PNM in the 1956 and the 1986 general elections, which required me to go to the research archives and look at the newspapers, the Guardian in Trinidad in 1956. And if you get the occasion to do that, it's worth it. It's like going to a foreign country. You're talking about a tabloid, a broadsheet newspaper of sometimes 60 pages, and a newspaper with photographs on every page. And the only black people you see in the photographs are either accused of crimes or appearing in an advertisement in a lower position, pumping gas or ironing clothes. It's really, again, I'm grateful, Ryan, because you've laid out how long this gaze has become our approach to ourselves. And with that, Nicola, as a feminist filmmaker, I invite you to begin.
Can you hear me now? Yeah, cool. All right. Hi, everybody. So Ryan spoke about patriarchy, and we see the power that patriarchy has in shaping the way we think just when we look at the title of the panel, of this panel, Male Gaze and Misogyny. Why not a panel entitled Female Gaze? How might we feel about a panel on the white gaze? I use this as an example to show how normalized patriarchy is, which Ryan was alluding to. I'm calling attention to this as a small step towards subverting the dominant male worldview, because awareness is the first step to change. This is why I've chosen to talk about the female gaze, because we have to start thinking differently in order to subvert this patriarchy, which is just so deeply rooted. So as Ryan was saying, Laura Mulvey coined the phrase the male gaze, where the male looks while the female is looked at, so a passive thing. She's looked at by the camera, probably operated by a man, male characters within the film, as well as the audience. However, bell hooks points out that in feminist film theory, women actually meant white women. Feminist film theory's privileging of sexual difference actively suppresses recognition of race, even when discussing films that have Black women in them. It doesn't consider Black women's representation worthy of discussion, nor that they have both race and gender to contend with. Hooks argues that not only are Black women underrepresented in film, but also that Black women are not allowed to look actively. They're being looked at. Looking is a powerful thing. Changing ideas of spectatorship to incorporate the idea that Black women have the power to look, and that we do look, and that we look at ourselves as well as each other, not in a way that objectifies, but in a way that affirms our subjectivity, and that is very empowering. I'm a feminist filmmaker, and I make films with women who enact the power of looking within themselves, and in doing so, they make us look at them and perhaps make us look at ourselves. I'm a filmmaker, not an academic, and recently I've been reading some theory to help me reflect and analyzing on my filmmaking process and the films that I make, in the hope that I can improve and more effectively convey these ideas and experiences that women are talking to me in their stories that they're sharing with me. So today I'm just going to share some of what I'm learning, and perhaps we can discuss it or not. My definition of feminism is being against all oppression and working towards social justice and transformation at the individual level as well as the societal level. Being a feminist filmmaker means for me that I shine a light on stories by or about women who are deemed unimportant by those who are in power and hold power. That women storytellers I work with, they feel safe and supported, is my priority. In cases where women have signed consent forms and have been financially compensated, if they decide at any point that they don't want to go through with this, even if the film is already made, it's dropped, it's not screened. Central to my filmmaking process and films is that we take care of each other and we place importance and value on the relationships towards promoting the transformation of the psyche of the individual storyteller and hopefully the viewers and perhaps at large, the society at large. Being a feminist filmmaker means in my filmmaking process, I create an arena in which a storyteller feels her experience is acknowledged and valued. It's important and that it matters. And I think for some of the women I work with, they've said that they feel a sense of catharsis and empowerment. It doesn't necessarily always happen, but that's another story. Feminist filmmaking to me challenges domination, control, violence, competitiveness, and greed. Much of my work has been with and about issues that affect low-income, Black, African women with a view towards redistributing power and responsibility. That's what I'm trying for, but that's going to take a long time. It is about repositioning Black women first and foremost by showing Black women's agency. They're not passive, they're active, they're making decisions, they think, they are guiding, they are driving their own lives. And they face just the same things we face, maybe in a different cultural context. It's simple, but apparently it's revolutionary. So what is this thing called the female gaze? The female gaze is not as simple as the opposite of the male gaze, where women objectify men, and we now have, men in the nice, tops off and, Chippendales or whatever, full Monty, I guess. The female gaze is something intangible, almost ethereal, I think. It's hard to put your finger on it, but when I read this description by Joey, formerly Jill Soloway, I felt it. I felt it's what I feel when I'm working with women, I'm hearing their stories and I'm in the zone, that there's a connection, a dynamic thing happening between us. And this is what guided me in the edit when I made the film Becky that's in the film festival today, this week. So Joey Soloway's description of the female gaze is, more than a camera or shooting style, it is an empathy generator that says, I was there in that room. I can feel it now. The female gaze says, I was there, and this is my shame, and this is my life, and this is my humor, and I will take all of it, and I will put it in my protagonist, even though I make documentary, but that's another story. And I will light it, and I will have music, and I will side with her. The female gaze is a baby, and she is blind, and she is 1 day old. So I really felt kind of what I'm doing and what I'm trying to do with that. Motion pictures are over 100 years old, and their creation has been male-dominated. So really, the female gaze is a fairly new concept. And it hasn't really had time to become fully formed and crystallize yet. So I found it quite interesting. I found some cinematographers and their take what they said on the female gaze. So these are women and cinematographers in this, you don't find many female cinematographers. So one, Babette Mangold, said, in the early 70s, when I arrived in New York from Paris, there definitely was the desire to invent a female gaze. Women started to shoot films made by women and also for women. Joan Churchill, she did Aileen, The Life and Death of a Serial Killer. I don't see men shooting as close as I do to people. They tend to hang back and shoot over the shoulders, whereas I generally will be trying to insituate myself into the middle of the circle. Maybe the female gaze will raise the consciousness of us all, leading to a fuller understanding of what it means to be female in a patriarchal society. Kirsten Johnson, who did The Camera Person, with this world saturated in male-imagined imagery, it takes some of us years to understand that it is possible to see differently, that aspiring to express what is singular to us has great value, and that while the specificity of our images may strike some as unfamiliar, this is not a sign of failure of craft, but a mark of triumph in a landscape in which our visibility is so rare. So these cinematographers kind of brought me to a place where I started thinking, why are we seeing in terms of a female gaze? Maybe it's more about breaking free of patriarchal constraints. In a world where patriarchy is the dominant system of society or government, we have historically thought of gender binaries and have articulated the dominant gaze as the male gaze. So patriarchy's dominance has all but obliterated the other gaze, whether it's women or queer or trans, even the gaze of men who do not adhere to patriarchy's constructions of what a man is supposed to be. There are, of course, women whose gaze could be considered male and whose gaze may be female in one film and something completely different in another film. So just to throw in a couple of popular examples that people might know is the talented Catherine Bigelow. She was the first woman to win an Academy Award for Best Director for her movie, The Hurt Locker. And she's known for the depiction of violence in her films. And there was much discussion on whether she was actually a female gaze or whether it was actually a male gaze, which sort of reminded me of the sort of Maggie Thatcher, I don't even want to say the wrong thing, but you know where what I'm thinking. The second example is the opening and grueling scene in Steven Spielberg's Saving Private Ryan, which might be described by some as a female gaze. It's quite sensitive, and but I spoke to somebody else and they were like, no. Anyway, so just bringing some of these ideas out. So how does all this relate to us here in the Caribbean and the diaspora? I started simple, thinking of Caribbean women filmmakers I know, most of whom are Trinis, and whose films I have viewed at this film festival over the years. And a few came to mind that you may have seen. So I was thinking, what is this female gaze? What it looks like? Maybe that'll help me understand it a bit better. And one I thought it was Shari Petty's Soft Hair on the natural hair experience in TNT. Mandisa Panton's Caribbean Skin African Identity, where she looks at what being African means in TNT today. A film that I think, interestingly enough, resulted in viewers criticizing the way she viewed her own identity. I'm like, it's your identity. So I think that's, again, the norms of society. Maria Govan's Rain, where the young girl Rain travels from her smaller island to Nassau in search for the mother she never knew, and she finds out her mom is an occasional prostitute. And in this process, Rain discovers her own ability as a runner. And then Maria went on, again, a female filmmaker, and she went on to do Play the Devil. And that's a different gaze because it's exploring themes around homosexuality. So again, one filmmaker making, slightly different gazes, I think, or very different gazes. And then there's Sally's Way, about a 12-year-old girl orphaned by HIV/AIDS, and which is a universal message of how to grow despite the odds. And then going back a little further, not sure how old we all are, but anyway, there's Frances Ann Solomon's 1995 work, What My Mother Told Me, where a daughter who returns to Trinidad to bury her father discovers the uncomfortable truth of her past. And I think Frances Ann also had, there were repercussions for making that film. And I mean, 1995, that's not all that long ago, but maybe it is for some. But they say meaningful change is uncomfortable. Actually, speaking to one programmer, there's a young Trinidadian man, Oliver Mill, and his sensitive portrayals of people came up. I saw his student film, which is about a war film, but it was all about the soldiers in the war, and photographs of their children, and that sensitivity came through it. So I thought, is that a female gaze that a man is actually seeing? So I thought that was interesting. And just to add, really, of course, a seminal film, Daughters of the Dust, by Julie Dash, who dared place Black females at the center of the narrative. So I think, in terms of, again, the race as well as womanhood is an issue. So then I talked to a couple of more filmmakers to find out just their experience in the film industry, because anyway, I'll go ahead. So how can we talk about a female gaze if we're only just learning how to make films, One filmmaker working on larger budget films made in Trinidad talked about industry as being mechanisms such as the film festival. Another bemoaned the lack of government funding and that it is declining. And our present Prime Minister has actually said that the film industry is not on his agenda. Yet another said she thought the first time there was a government desk dedicated to film was when it was at TIDCO, not sure what years that was in, which was the Tourism and Industrial Development Company of Trinidad. I think I actually got a grant when it was that. So that was like new, which I've been told that they stopped those grants now. Another said she felt Trinidad has a high number of women filmmakers, but less so up the islands. I'm not sure how true that is. And of course, in the Caribbean, Cuba, I guess, is the primary film spot, with Dominican Republic now growing apace. One Trinidad filmmaker I spoke to felt that there were many women working in filmmaking in Trinidad. Did I just say that again? I think I just said that. That women were taking on the role of producers, especially in Trinidad. And that they were working with men so that although they weren't making films themselves, they were actually, there was some kind of interaction between the men who had control and the women. And so how much of the female gaze is coming into films that way. Another filmmaker suggested that in Jamaica, environmental issues were of a particular concern to women filmmakers. What else? we're talking about who gets funds, access to resources. And I think Ryan sort of pointed to that a bit, we need to fund people to get to a different place. Without the funds, we can't do it. Then we get the outliers, which sort of goes on to what's the nexus between filmmakers and society? Where do filmmakers end? When does one end and one begin? Because filmmakers are members of the society, and it's kind of like a chicken and an egg kind of scenario. How do we change? I don't know, we kind of depressed, all this sort of thing. I really think we have to change society. I guess it's at the same time, but anyway, we can talk about that later. And filmmakers are part of society. Just mentioned that. And perhaps filmmakers are outliers and trailblazers, but either way, we need to smash patriarchy and the chains that hold us all back, men, women, boys, and girls.
Thank you very much, Nix. Again, very useful to have the female gaze illustrated in that fashion. Before Sue-Ann, before you start, I just want to ask you quickly, Nix, and we'll talk about this after Sue-Ann, when we begin quarreling with one another. Well, we not necessarily quarreling with one another, but I seriously want to ask, you've outlined an approach to filmmaking, then you don't have to answer in depth now, but kind of yes or no. Do you think that kind of, I'm dominant to be disparaging when I say peacenik, kind of hippie, kind of flower people. It's a lovely approach, and I love that spirit. But can that work in this industry? Can you make... Are you
talking about the type of films I make?
No, the approach to filmmaking, where you are considerate of everybody involved and trying to make something, a work of art. I
personally don't see why not. I mean, I've had this argument with a couple of people, and people say, is it Scorsese? He makes fantastic films and he's a horrible nightmare on set. Well, I don't get that. I mean, that's at the sort of the superficial level. I think it's the same thing in restaurants. I think if you treat people properly, you get the best out of them. You're talking about long-term relationships, which is what happens in filmmaking. Maybe not at the bottom, because I guess everybody's looking for short-term work. But I think, directors and cinematographers, very often they work together for a lifetime.
All right. And then the other thing I just wanted to add to what you were saying was Black women, when they did get into film, had to look white, or as white as possible. They had to have their hair straightened. And we live with that now. When Barack Obama and Michelle Obama left the White House, and the first picture appeared of Michelle Obama with her hair natural, and she said that she couldn't take that picture before leaving the White House, or they never got into the White House. All right. With that, we're keeping an eye on the time, because we have about 40 minutes left. I make it. Sue-Ann, please. You have to turn your mic on and take it away.
Thank you very much. Thank you, colleagues, for your presentation so far. And I'm responding to 3 things, as well as trying to ground things, kind of bring it back to why all of this is operating and how is it operating as a general mechanism. One is, in terms of the effect of the MeToo movement, the associated idea around free speech and freedom of expression, or even just freedom or liberalism, and the associated idea around the disciplinary gaze, which you raised, Michael? No, I forgot your name, I'm sorry. Yeah, forgive me. As well as the gaze, if we sex the gaze. So I'm taking it behind that, and I'm going to suggest that the male gaze and misogyny are mechanisms that think of them more as cultural thought and ways of being and doing that we find ourselves implicated in, no matter who we are. Film is a form of storytelling. We tell ourselves things about ourselves and those we see outside of ourselves. And as a result of this telling, we retell things that we find recognizable. The linguistics will call that redundant. We know it, we can recognize it, we see the meaning, but we also try to resist that by telling stories against those. So in essence, what happens is that we are all implicated in a complex mechanism that is driven by discourses of power, fundamentally. So what I would like to do is I would like to propose an understanding of why contempt seems to be so taken for granted. Remember, misogyny is the hatred and contempt for the feminine. And the feminine, because of heteronormativity, is supposedly attached to the female. But we appreciate that the feminine does not necessarily have to be attached so in such a linear way to anybody. But this contempt or this hatred or this resentment is so taken for granted and then expressed as the recognizable in our stories, our products, our ways of coming to know ourselves through what we craft. Because they then are the lens through which we can see the world. The eye is not a camera, the eye is a perspective. The camera is just a data gathering tool. I'm not a filmmaker, so don't fight me, okay? I'm just suggesting to you that the camera gives us an angle, and of course it allows you to capture that thing you represent. But the representation of that thing comes through the perspective. That perspective is based on our norms, our presumptions, and our assumptions, and fundamentally, our mythologies. Myths have power because we do not recognize them in the conscious plane. Myths rest at that underneath space. So we have storytelling. They're not falsehoods. They're just reinforced notions of what can be, of knowables, in other words. So the contempt that we see, you were speaking about earlier, why do I see that there is, liberation, sexual liberation, or the influence of feminism, or the influence of a female gaze, or even the MeToo movement, but yet still I see reproduced and represented and even escalated some of the very things that produced sexist myths and sexisms, misogyny being one. The reason that is so is you have to ask yourself, how do we know what we know? We know what we know through mechanisms of language and discourse that says, these are the things that would appeal to people, fulfill our needs, or make our stories understandable. Now, I have watched some productions that leave me feeling obtuse. I'm like, what is that about? And those, I just kind of like, okay, right? But then I also watch those that are super predictable. Whether it is those that are very hard to understand, at least for me, or those that are super predictable, and I'm not going to name them, but you all know, they all come and they're implicated in, again, these myths that says, this is what it means to be feminine, this is what it means to be masculine, and this is how masculine and feminine engages with each other as part of complex lived experiences. BC was pointing about, the intersecting factors of race and class and some country, religion, and skin color and all of that. And those intersecting factors become problematic because there's an idea that a myth is a universal. However, the complexity of human experience just throws away all those universals. So I'll tell you, I had a whole presentation prepared, but I want to be in conversation with you all. So this is why I'm pulling from it to converse. But as I said, my main proposition is that contempt is taken for granted because misogyny and the male gaze are always in conversation. Where is that conversation occurring? Mechanisms that enforce and reinforce a patriarchal social order. And it's really good that you introduced patriarchy at the very beginning, but patriarchy is actually a system that maintains human kinship systems. And it manifests in the political and in the commodification of human bodies. Women's bodies are commodified because of the procreative drive. That commodification then manifests through our sexualization, our looking with desire, our looking with narcissism, our looking with voyeurism, all of this to do with the male gaze. Now, the male gaze might appear at once to say the people with the power to name the world are males and or masculine, and thus asserted from their perspective. But the male gaze can be an act of looking from any source, because whatever source is looking fundamentally looks with desire, with voyeurism, or with narcissism, placing oneself in the context, as with pornography, or looking with desire. If you're looking at bodies on display that are objectified and you're acting upon them, whether you see yourself in the scene or not. Or that voyeur, you get pleasure of seeing people enjoy their experience, whatever it may be. At the same time, you also have the disciplining gaze, the divining gaze, the gaze that asserts or prescribes what is normal and who can be normal. So that is one way gaze is functioning as a mechanism to enforce and reinforce our patriarchal social order that assigns greater value, status, and power to the masculine as opposed to the feminine. And at the same time, remember, they are co-constructing, they're always in conversation. You have misogyny. Misogyny is the expressed hatred, contempt for the feminine, especially femininity as it is worn by women, but by men who are seen to have lost their right to be part of the patriarchal contract, whether it is because they are homosexual or effeminate. Through misogyny, that same degree of disciplining, control, definition, reinterpretation, colonization of selves occurs. So what happens is that you have the gaze coalescing with the belief system, the sexist mythology that has existed for quite a long time and in fact rests with an ultimate binary explanation of ourselves. And that is that the masculine, as it rests in the male body, transcends the unexplainable nature that we live in, and the feminine, as it rests in the female body, does not, because of procreative biology. So fundamentally, this social order that is reproduced in our storytelling, apparent in the process, the effect, the appeal, the discourses or languages used, be they visual or text, do well to tell us who we are, who we can be, or who we must resist being. Because remember, we can also see misogyny and the male gaze at play as these unavoidable mechanisms of social normativity in films that produced resistant themes or tropes. So to wrap up what I'm saying, because I don't want to belabor the point, I am suggesting that all that we are contending with, the contradictions that we are contending with, we will continue to contend with them because we cannot speak outside our framework of understanding. We speak within, through, and away from them when we act against it and when we act within it. 1. 2. Misogyny and the male gaze, as it is apparent in our cultural products, including film, function as mechanisms that co-construct power relations, be those material, social, psychological, or cultural relations of gender. And they suggest to us that sexist myths continue to be viable themes for our livable lives. For example, if you like Hallmark Channel, you would observe that over the years, the storyline is successful woman in the city is doing well, but her life is not fulfilled. She goes to the country in an ideal town with no crime, no violence, and really few Black people, though it's changing now, it's becoming a little bit more ethnically diverse. And she goes there and finds a lost love, the one that got away, or a new love, who's just really quite simple and down to earth and understands the value of life, which is falling in love and having babies and living a simple life rather than the fast-paced, successful, independent woman vibe. That's just one example. So it is really that the gaze forms the perspectives for the information this camera gathers, but the ideology responds to the looking and the looked upon. It responds to how we are implicated in that process of looking and looking back. If I went a little bit off there, just forgive me. So together they constitute the frames through which we tell the stories that reinforce ourselves in relation to each other, the norms we rely on and take for granted, and the assumptions about female, femininity, and the embodiment and expression of the feminine. Oh, just one other thing as an aside. The MeToo movement attempts to address members of the industry and how they are engaged in terms of gender-based violence and sexual violence. Associately, the MeToo movement will deal with this element, this aspect, but its focus at present in its advocacy and activism is about how these people are living, especially as they experience sexual violence. So we should not attempt to attribute the MeToo with beyond the scope that it is at present. So I just wanted to throw that in there. And with that, I conclude. How then do we contend with contempt that is taken for granted?
Sue-Ann,
yes,
you're kind of concluding like Lord of the Rings 3. Which had about 7 endings.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. But I really would like to move the discussion onto discussion. That was a great grounding. I want to take issue with what you're saying right away, though, to perhaps kick off this discussion. Did I misunderstand? Was the last thing you said there that the MeToo movement has reached where it should have reached?
No, not at all. What I'm saying is that the MeToo movement has as a strong central focus a struggle against systematic sexual violence of females and some men who work in the industry. In that cause, it is very direct. However, all of these associated things in terms of representation, etc., would of course be part of its overall mandate. But I think that as the MeToo movement evolves, it is very much rested in this notion about fighting sexual violence against those who have been subject to it in the industry.
Okay. Next, do you think that the MeToo movement needs now to step up a gear to achieve the bringing about of a female gaze or the shifting away from the male gaze?
Can you hear me?
I can.
Yeah.
You can.
I don't know. I'm just confused about the whole thing because I don't know how we change it. And it feels like we can't ask one thing to do all jobs. And I think MeToo probably had its success. And as Sue-Ann is saying that it has limitations. So in Kenya, MeToo will mean nothing. When I was there, it just, poor Black women, it's there's no relation. Maybe Trinidad was kind of in the middle, women were protesting, but I wonder if it's sort of, again, that same kind of, I don't know, this class, industry. Yeah, so I'm not sure how you would define those limitations in the Trinidad context, because it's more, whereas in Kenya, it just didn't, you are somebody, a young, anybody in the countryside, they're not even going to have heard of it. And I've heard that from other places.
Is a moving away from the male gaze a movement of liberation? Yes or no?
Yes. But I think the question may be, what are we moving to?
All right. I would like to have Ryan. I'm asking this because, as far as I can discern, and I'm not trying to be difficult or provocative, but what has happened so far is what is the only thing that could have happened so far because of how the industry evolved. And because you had men in charge of not just filmmaking, Hollywood, but everything, and not just men, but white, American and European men, the Married Women's Property Act, and this is a hangover from my lawyering days, in England was 1882. 12 years before the year 1900 was the first time women were allowed to own property in England. If you were a woman and you inherited your father's, you were your father's only child, and you inherited his stately home and his massive fortune, and you got married, it became your husband's wealth. Now, in that context, can we really be surprised? In fact, are we not doing better than we ought to expect, in that you have so many female filmmakers and we're actually having a discussion like this?
So, yeah, I think we are getting better, but it's so. How should we look at this? All right, so I think Nicola, you need to mute your mic. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So I think we need to look back. I know everybody wants change instantly, but the length of time that when we, if so, it's 100 years from now, when we look back, or 200 years from now, when we look back at this time, it will seem like a blink. You know, time history as a way of compressing time. So, like, these changes that we want to see are not going to happen overnight. It will take a while, and we just need to work at it, because behaviors are not learned. You're not born with these behaviors. They are taught and not learned. So you're not born a racist, but society that you're around, your environment, that is what breeds the racism in people. The same with misogyny. If you ask me, in my opinion, the same with misogyny. You're not born a certain way, right? So I think that in the future we are definitely moving on the right path, but it's going to take a while. And film is a very powerful tool and a device to sell your dreams and your narratives and what you think society or even your nation could aspire to be. So every nation any major nation has done it. So when Hitler came into power, that's what he did. He formed a film commission to sell his dream of what his Nazi Germany would look like to the Reich. UK did it, USA does it, South Korea, China does it. Everybody form a film commission to sell what you think is your ideal society and what your nation should be. And I think in the Caribbean, we don't have that. And I think it's something very important that we need to sell, because we are different. We are not America, obviously, but we are heavily influenced. So their structures and their stories and their narratives, what we see all the time. Everybody is on Netflix, you're watching HBO, you're watching these shows. But who are we? And is that how we deal with our women? And this is how society should be. Like, we don't know. It still take a while, but
how can we go about? What actions can we take to break this male gaze? Apart from what Nicola is suggesting of a feminist filmmaking approach, do we need to restrict? Do we need legislation in place for more local content? What can we actually do to move away from this male gaze?
I wonder if I may come in here and give an example of how you can do either large interventions or isolated interventions. So, for example, Bridgerton, the series, which became this huge, hit, they had, in terms of feminist filmmaking, they had an intimacy coordinator. Now, they had some really risky rated R sex scenes, right? You're seeing everything. But they had this person involved in the process of making that. I don't know the details of it, but one might suspect that if this is involved, then the actors who are involved especially would find themselves having a more agentic experience. At the same time, even if you're moving away from the male gaze, it mustn't be that we presume that some of the things that we moralize are somehow not part of that scopophilic looking that women have. Sexuality and nudity and all of these things are part of the desire that women have. To presume that it is not so is to then apply a very patriarchal sense. So it is possible to still have content, all forms of content, without restricting content, but it is the purpose of that content, one, is a way. So let's say in the Caribbean, if you're making things and you have frameworks in place, I don't know what they are, you then suggest what is the purpose of this product and the effect you want to have. Secondly, I think Nicola is very right. The process of creating is very important. One can choose to do anything, but people must not find themselves subject to coercion or intimidation or all the other things that, the Harvey business revealed to us. When they're engaging in anything, it could be Wonder Woman, it could be Star Trek, it could be Sweet Magnolias. It mustn't be a case where you find yourself implicated in disempowerment. So I think that the aim mustn't be, and I dare say, to censor content, because I think our lives are complex and messy and dirty and sometimes we understand through seeing this. It helps us come to terms with who we are. But how we come to that and the purpose of that is where I think the intervention should be.
Go ahead, next.
I think I agree with that, but I think we go back to, if we're talking about changing things through film, I kind of think we need to work on the film industry and actually things like mechanisms and criteria and structures that guard, do no harm, the journalist thing, you have a contract with do no harm, and there's certain value systems, but also and funding women. So funding women, but then again, you can't just fund women. You'd have to have, again, a set of criteria, because then a woman might want to do a music video where all the women in it are objectified. So you have to have very clear criteria. So it goes back, I think, to what is a film industry? And if we don't have one, what's the conversation?
You might have said something deeply profound there. Ryan, I'm asking you to come in a moment, but I just want to say I am aware, although I can't see them, that we have a floor. And if you want to ask questions of the panel, you can, although I have no idea how you would go about doing that. I'm sure there is a mechanism for it. Yes, Ryan.
Right. So I was going to say, what was I going to say? No, I forget. So to add to Nicola's point there, yes, we need to tell more stories, but we shouldn't restrict stories. We shouldn't keep them in a box. Like, who's to say, as you said, woman who wants to do music videos objectifying women, maybe that's the story they want to tell, And why should we stop them? Maybe it's a story or maybe it's a story about an alcoholic beating his wife. Or maybe, do you stop that story? Because maybe somebody seeing that story would see it and say, that is not what I want to do. You see the bad. So that way, that is not what I want to do. Or you don't glamorize the drug life, but you show it actually the gangster life, or you show it how it really is. Maybe that would make the viewer not want to do it. So it's just stuff like that. I don't think you should limit stories, because.
Well, I'm glad. I think we are all in agreement with that, and I'm very glad that no one has put forward the notion of censoring any creative person. But I want to know what can be done. All right, Ryan.
I think an important thing is we need to empower stories. We need to not tell people, boy, hush now, go and learn, go be an engineer, be this, be whatever. You need to. Why not have emphasize storytelling? So I want to hear what is your point of view, and if I could see how you express yourself, maybe that would change my views. So especially with women, we're gonna have more female filmmakers, which is good. It's good. So we can hear more of their stories. It shouldn't be, well, the only cameraman we have is men. So let's spread the wealth. Give everybody the opportunity. We have more film festivals, more investment in us, in our culture, in our stories, in ourselves. And I think by doing that, we would give people a platform to really see how everyone feels and what their narrative is, if that makes sense, you know?
It does make sense, but I'm looking more for concrete actions rather than funding or policy. You have to unmute your mic, Suan.
Oh, sorry. I just was wondering if, as a very tangible intervention, maybe to answer your question, I have to say your question is very hard to answer. What is the basis of awards? When you award people for their work, and how do you try to enforce the outcome or the effect or what you desire through the criteria you give for awards? It could be possible where you you do it through recognition. You recognize those people who you think meet the standard that you want to set, or you build it in. I'm not saying that will work, but maybe something to consider. That's the only real tangible thing, because I think it's very complex in terms of creativity. It's a creative process. I don't know otherwise.
So are things going as well as they can be expected to go? Is this what we're saying, that Hollywood had it, white men in Hollywood had it, have had control since the Lumiere brothers started this thing, and we just have to go on quietly making our own films and hoping that somebody will hand out a little diversity? I see you sizing up there.
I don't know. I don't know why you have a problem with the funding thing.
I don't have a problem with funding, but I find that's just a very Trinidadian answer, that we go cap in hand to the government, or we want a subvention, or we must this money that we haven't earned must be voted to the end that we want. Don't get me wrong, I am all for funding for the arts.
Yeah, no.
But what more can we do as filmmakers, as Ryan?
So I'm not saying we go in cap in hand for money. Because you could always, it's just the opportunity is what you need. Like, people in certain societies, they probably never hold a camera in their life. They have stories to tell, but we have no idea. If you watch Art Connect from Michael Gallifrey a couple of years ago, he actually gave them cameras to go and film their lives. And one of the kids, when they asked, what is her happiest moment, happiest memory? And the child said she doesn't have any. She doesn't have any happy memories. She can't think of any. So it's just the opportunity, I think. So it's not just government, give me money to make things. Is this the opportunity? Yes, we need funding, and it's an important thing to develop your society, which we don't utilize, we don't capitalize on. We have some of the most unique stories in the world. You have a mix of different influences that even some parts of the Caribbean don't have, but we don't capitalize on it. And I think we have to start somewhere. So if we could capitalize on our stories and sell the dream of what we should be, I think we have a good foundation to move on in the future. And it wouldn't be today or tomorrow or next week or next one, next year even. It'll take time. I mean, as you said, women couldn't own property in England the turn of the century, right? And here we are now. So you never know.
Maybe I'm a little impatient than most people. My direct family always tells me that. I want to say again to the floor, the virtual floor that is out there, our time is ticking down. If you have questions for the panel, or you have a statement to make, please feel free to do so. Although, yes, Nix.
I think I'll go ahead with what Ryan was saying. I think democratization, I've worked not even in film, but just in communication, and not giving people voice, but giving them the tools, whether it's writing, whether it's photographs, whether it's photography, but giving the tools, if you're thinking of sort of citizen journalism, something like that. But so it becomes a norm. I mean, everybody has a cell phone now, and I literally mean that. And so they don't all have video, or, you can't take photographs. But I mean, I've done some courses with, in Kenya, where I've trained young girls to tell their stories. But I also think it needs to be much longer term. So I think the idea of doing things in a I think it actually needs to be incorporated. You can't just do one course. It's a way of communicating over a period of time, over years, that it becomes a different language in the same way that I guess traditionally it's math and English. That voice is something,
So is it technology? Because you talk about empowering people, giving them, everybody with a smartphone can make a movie. TikTok, people are making very, very, very short films on TikTok every day. Trinidadians, there's a definite Trinidadian flavor being added to TikTok now. So
a friend of mine has a daughter, just to highlight this, just to add to this topic. My friend has a daughter, she's 11 years old, and she's been making little videos on I think she's an iPad, or a tablet. And she's making a little video, and they have views online. She has it on YouTube, and it's funny, some funny and like great stories. And I always go check it out, So yeah, technology. But the access to that technology to even tell those stories is like where society is changing. The ease of access to technology is also a big thing that could help push the change.
Go on, Dix.
But I think we also have to be careful that while everybody has a cell phone practically, and some can take photographs, there is also the reality of the digital divide. So I think that's another issue. But I don't think I don't think it needs to stop us, but I think it's something that we really do. I mean, you can't even go to the bank here without having a cell phone. I mean, I don't know how old people are going to do it since COVID. So yeah, but I think that's another.
And it's even worse in Europe. You can't do anything. You don't get a human being anywhere. You have to join a WhatsApp group on Virgin Airlines and on National Health Test and Trace, which sadly I have experience of. So is the answer then that we're doing as well as can possibly be expected, and if we have to be under the male gaze for a while longer, while the tide comes in or goes out, so be it? Is there nothing revolutionary?
BC, I don't think that I would agree with saying that, because I think that people in the industry, either individually or collectively, make moves to make changes, and that's how we have had changes. You've cited history from outside of the Caribbean, outside of Trinidad and Tobago, but there were things that obtained here that have changed over time tremendously, let's say, not a century, in decades, in terms of what we're talking about. But I think that what we have to accept is that you cannot erase the influence of the male gaze or of misogyny or any of these other sexist themes. At the same time, there is power in resistance. And I think that people can be encouraged, as my gentleman colleague here, whose name I keep forgetting.
Ryan, like
Ryan.
Ryan.
Yes, I wanted to say Brian. I said, that's not his name. You all forgive me. Today's Thursday. I'm sleepy. Anyway, as you were saying rightfully, there is this need for innovation. I think it's a most valuable point. And earlier on, you made another associated point about encouraging people to take on this profession, this endeavor, in a real way. I think part of the limits to how people respond is because it's not an aspirational role universally. So one says you have a talent or it's your vocation, you can follow it. But, the aspirational is probably academic or be a doctor or lawyer, whatever it may be. And so there needs to be legitimacy attached so that people can then feel free to innovate using technology or how they tell the stories and so forth. We have examples of it. And people will then free themselves to produce content that is unique and authentic. I also would like to say that the commercial imperative is very powerful. And even with now, yeah.
All right, I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to interrupt you there
Yeah.
because we're gonna have to wrap it very quickly. But I was hoping that that someone would have. I know Trinidadians like to put on headlights or wear a red shirt or a black shirt, and do kind of namby-pamby protests. But isn't this something that filmmakers in Trinidad could lead from the front with, by taking action against films that depict hateful treatment of women? For example, the reason we're having this chat is because in the programming committee, we noticed so many filmmakers taking what to me was a lazy way out, or perhaps the Saw approach, treating women as really as objects, not even as sexual objects, but just objects of murder. Is there not room for filmmakers like yourself to make a film about misogyny and the male gaze?
Yeah. So yeah, I think there's a space for it, but to each their own. Like, so if all right, maybe if they introduce legislation maybe against that form of violence, but then is that the story? Do you want to restrict stories? So I'll use my stories to tell the story I know and I want to tell.
We already agreed, and I'm very glad we're all in agreement. But we're not going to restrict art in any form, any creation. Now we're going to have to
how
wrap
do we?
up,
Okay.
because we have. I'm seeing we have seconds left. So thank you to the panel. Thank you to the floor, wherever you are. I've not been able to lay eyes on you or hear questions from you. This has been the panel, Misogyny and the Male Gaze. The film festival continues. There are great films and great panels coming up. Goodbye, I guess.
Hi, everybody. I just want to say thank you so much to BC and all our panelists. And thank you so much for joining us for this panel. I think it's really important, and I hope it's the seed of a kind of action or thought has been planted in our audience and viewers, that this is something that really needs to be considered and needs to be I would argue that a political statement needs to be incorporated into the way that we work. I would argue that I disagree with Ryan on that point. I don't think it's to each his own. I think that to each his own means nothing changes. I actually think decisions as filmmakers, that actually we have to make active decisions, not passively allow what will be to be. It's about actively making a decision to change the paradigm, even if it is only starting out with your crew and with the stories that you are choosing to tell. And I think that this is something that needs to be actively considered moving forward. Anyway, that's just my 10 cents. But thank you, everybody, for joining us. And do continue to hang out with us. We're at ttfilmfestival.com. You can watch our panels there. You can watch movies there. You can buy tickets there. You can learn all about all the great films that BC and his fellow programmers selected for the film festival, and really get a sense of the Caribbean in 2021 as seen by ourselves. So thank you very much, everybody, and keep hanging with us at ttfilmfestival.com.